The Psalms often assume the reality of war. In a fallen world filled with evil and injustice, the Psalms frequently describe the presence of war and even rejoice when, through military victories, the God of love and power delivers his people by punishing the wicked. There's never a glorification of war in these Psalms. The glory is reserved for the victory of God's justice, putting an end to harmful wrongs. Psalm 21, to the choir master, a psalm of David. O Lord, in your strength the king rejoices, and in your salvation how greatly he exults. You have given him his heart's desire, and have not withheld the request of his lips. Selah. For you meet him with rich blessings. You set a crown of fine gold upon his head. He asked life of you. You gave it to him, length of days forever and ever. His glory is great through your salvation. Splendor and majesty you bestow on him. For you make him most blessed forever. You make him glad with the joy of your presence. For the king trusts in the Lord, and through the steadfast love of the Most High, he shall not be moved. Your hand will find out all your enemies. Your right hand will find out those who hate you. You will make them as a blazing oven when you appear. The Lord will swallow them up in his wrath, and fire will consume them. You will destroy their descendants from the earth, and their offspring from among the children of man. Though they plan evil against you, though they devise mischief, they will not succeed. For you will put them to flight. You will aim at their faces with your bows. Be exalted, O Lord, in your strength. We will sing and praise your power. Psalm 21 is a companion to Psalm 20, and they're so similar in their themes that they might have been composed together, or at least intentionally placed next to each other. Remember that Psalm 20 was a prayer and blessing for the king of Israel before he departed for battle. Psalm 21 has the tone of victory and thanksgiving, like the king is returning from the battle, and hears this song of joy rising from the people at the city gates. The psalm begins, O Lord, in your strength the king rejoices, and in your salvation how greatly he exults. In Psalm 20, the king declared that he did not put his ultimate trust in chariots or in horses, but in the name of the Lord. And here, the outcome of that trust leads to joy and praise. Salvation or deliverance links back to Psalm 20, where the same root word appears 3 times. The strength and loyalty of the covenant Lord who saves his people out of their distress causes everyone here to burst out in a loud, exuberant song of worship. Some think that the point of view of the person speaking in the first half of this psalm could be a priest or a prophet, or perhaps the congregation as a whole, or even the king speaking of himself in the third person. In some ways, it doesn't matter because the psalm has the feel of unity and corporate praise, voices mingling together in celebration. In fact, the very last verse highlights the communal nature of this song. Be exalted, O Lord, in your strength. We will sing and praise your power. Again, this closing prayer echoes a similar prayer at the end of Psalm 20, but here it circles back to the theme of the Lord's strength. Our God is strong. His power is unparalleled, and when we align ourselves with him, God uses his power to save his people. The song of celebration continues as the people praise God for all the gifts that he gives the king. Remember that many psalms about kingship assume that we're talking about an ideal king, a ruler who is pious and faithful and humble before the Lord. For this kind of king, God gives him the desires of his heart, because a righteous leader wants only what is glorifying to God, and good for his people. God answers his prayers and blesses him with good things, granting him a measure of majesty and splendor that is meant to reflect God's own glory. In verse 4, the king is promised a long life as well as a legacy. He asked life of you. You gave it to him, length of days forever and ever. There's an echo here of 2 Samuel 7, in which God promised David a dynasty that would last forever. In verse 6, the people say, "For you make him most blessed forever." And there's some ambiguity about whether the king is the recipient or the vehicle of blessing. It's likely both. As one commentator writes, quote, "In the theology of the Bible, a person receives God's blessing in order to convey that blessing to others. And this is especially true of the Davidic king, who is expressly forbidden to use his blessed position to raise himself above his fellow Israelites." Unquote. What is the reason for this blessed position? Verse 7, which is the heart of the psalm. "For the king trusts in the Lord, and through the steadfast love of the Most High, he shall not be moved." Here again is the theme of trust connected to the loyal love, the chesed of the Lord, Yahweh, God's covenant name, and of the Most High, a term often used in the book of Psalms. So Psalm 21 begins and ends by praising God for his strength. But in the center of the psalm, we come back to the steadfast love that is behind that strength. The reason we trust in the Lord is not only because he is omnipotent, but also because he uses his strength to keep his beloved ones safe and secure. God's love and God's power are what lead his people to a life of joy. Whereas the first half of Psalm 21 focused on the positive blessings that God gives to the king, the second half emphasizes the punishment that God gives to his enemies. Verse 8, "Your hand will find out all your enemies, your right hand will find out those who hate you." In the wake of verse 7, declaring that the king will never be moved through the love of the Most High, the psalm turns its attention toward those who want to topple God's king and destroy his people. It's unclear throughout this section whether the "you" refers to God or to the king, and that ambiguity might be intentional. If the king has aligned himself with God, then those who hate one will also hate the other. Here, the strength of God is described as a blazing oven, which in the prophets is a metaphor for divine judgment on evil. Verse 10 can be troubling to modern ears. "You will destroy their descendants from the earth, and their offspring from among the children of man." Now, these words probably assume that the enemy's descendants would continue the same hostility as their parents. But like the rebels in Psalm 2, if someone abandons their wicked ways and humbles themselves before the Lord, they are offered forgiveness and refuge. Another interesting note about this section is that the words used here are a subtle allusion to Korah's rebellion in Numbers 16, which came from inside Israel. So this isn't a crusade against non-Israelites. This is a bigger struggle in the world between those who trust in the Lord and those who hate God and plan evil against him. Just like Psalms 1 and 2, Psalm 21 should motivate us to examine ourselves and ask, what path is my life taking, and where is my allegiance? Do I trust in myself, or do I rely on the steadfast love and the strong power of the Lord? Whenever we read a psalm about a king, we can understand them on different levels. First, these were written and sung in their own historical context, like when David wrote this psalm about his own experiences. Second, these songs were meant to be sung and applied by the kings of Israel who followed after David. And finally, these psalms are meant to fill our hearts with longing for the King of Kings, Jesus the Messiah, and the Son of David, who fulfills every word of every psalm. In Jesus, divine power and divine love became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. And yet he did not consider divinity a thing to be grasped, but he emptied himself of strength and status to become a servant who joyfully trusted in his Father for everything. Jesus lived to bless others, and he taught his followers to do the same. Yet because of his steadfast love, he allowed the evil plans of the enemies to succeed against him. On the cross, he suffered the fiery wrath of God for the atonement of our sins, and his strength left him as he breathed his last. Yet Jesus asked life of his Father, and he gave it to him, length of days forever and ever, as the King rose from the dead. He shall never be moved from his throne, and in his strength all people can rejoice. One day, Jesus will hunt down every enemy and rid the world of every evil. But God's people will happily sing the triumphant song of victory. Be exalted, O Lord, in your strength. We will sing and praise your power. What would it look like for us to pray Psalm 21? Here are some suggestions for making this psalm part of your prayer life. When you want to rejoice in the strong hand of God to save his people, when you long for a good leader who will use their power to bless others, when you want to align your heart's desires and prayers to God's will, when you wear gold jewelry, a reminder of God's rich blessings on the King, when you wonder how long you'll live and what kind of legacy you will leave, when you want to reorient and recenter your trust on the Lord and the Lord alone, when you are shaken, frightened, opposed by those who hate God and hate you, when you use an oven, a picture of God's frightening justice and wrath, when enemies are planning and plotting to undermine you and take you down, when you feel weak, like you lack the strength to do even small tasks, when you want to lean on the strong, everlasting arms of God, when you want to sing loudly in celebration of the power of our mighty God. Psalm 21, to the choir master, a psalm of David. O Lord, in your strength the King rejoices, and in your salvation how greatly he exults. You have given him his heart's desire, and have not withheld the request of his lips. Selah. For you meet him with rich blessings. You set a crown of fine gold upon his head. He asked life of you. You gave it to him, length of days forever and ever. His glory is great through your salvation. Splendor and majesty you bestow on him. For you make him most blessed forever. You make him glad with the joy of your presence. For the King trusts in the Lord, and through the steadfast love of the Most High, he shall not be moved. Your hand will find out all your enemies. Your right hand will find out those who hate you. You will make them as a blazing oven when you appear. The Lord will swallow them up in his wrath, and fire will consume them. You will destroy their descendants from the earth, and their offspring from among the children of man. Though they plan evil against you, though they devise mischief, they will not succeed. For you will put them to flight. You will aim at their faces with your bows. Be exalted, O Lord, in your strength. We will sing and praise your power. Thank you for listening to the Woven Psalms. This podcast is a ministry of Rock Hill Community Church in Duluth, Minnesota. I'm Mike Solis. I'm a pastor at Rock Hill and the writer of this podcast. Ethan Gibbs is our producer, editor, and composer of the theme music. Our logo was designed by Bo Walsh. This podcast uses the English Standard Version, published by Crossway. We want to give a special thanks to Poor Bishop Hooper for allowing us to use the music from their Every Psalm project. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please share it with others. You can learn more about our work at wovenpsalms.com.